once you've ejaculated, you fall below baseline. You now need a little bit more novel porn to get you to that same level. And so even if you start with pornography that is relatively, let's just say it's consensual and it's loving, often you're going to find yourself in the weirdest places in the internet where things are really dark, because your brain is an operating novel-seeking machine, and it's going to go into deeper and darker places.
Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. Tyson, thank you so much for being here today. We have a really interesting episode coming up. We're going to go into porn. We're going to go into watching porn on psychedelics. We're going to talk about sexual energy transmutation. We're going to talk about porn archetypes, mindful masturbation, and everything related to that, possibly even some talk about porn, virtual reality, and AI too. And yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. We met indirectly while talking under somebody else's Facebook post that we both experienced some, I don't know if controversy is the right word around, but we had some good conversation there. And I thought, wow, this guy has some really interesting perspectives. I would love to have a deeper conversation with him and bring him on the podcast. So thank you for being here. And I wonder if you'd take a moment to just introduce yourself and the work that you do and how you move through the world and maybe how you got here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Taylor, for having me. Really appreciate it and excited to be here. You and I do very similar work. And my main focus, though, is really on porn addiction. I've worked with hundreds of men in that realm, but I also work with men with semen retention, premature ejaculation, ED, becoming multi-orgasmic. But I also work with a lot of women and men that have been sexual abuse survivors, women and men that have gone through very serious experiences. And I work with them both with psychedelic facilitation, and then also I do bioelectric body work, which is effectively a machine where energy moves through my whole system and my hands become electric. And I work through the system and helping them to move and integrate stuck energy that's located in the nervous system. So I have both the body work perspective that I bring. I also am trained in internal family systems therapy, which is parts work. And I went through a trauma aware program as well. So I have that, under my belt. So I really enjoy this stuff. I also run men's circles online and offline. And I've been in it for about 5 or 6 years now.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Why do you do this work? What's the calling? What's the inspiration?
So I've never actually shared this story live or on a podcast. So I'm actually excited to, but it's a personal one. I actually thought that my first time watching pornography was or not watching it, but my first exposure to pornography was when I was 9 years old. I'd found a Vanna White Playboy in a field, and that sort of jump-started a whole addiction that lasted for 20 years. But recently, having done, 5+ years of therapy, done hundreds of psychedelic journeys, I was in an ayahuasca ceremony and came in touch with my first memory of life, actually. I was about 4 or 5 years old. And the way that this experience opened up to me, I was basically on my step-grandfather's lap, and he was a World War II vet, and he actually had a naked lady tattooed on his arm, on his forearm. And he was having her dance for me, but simultaneously reaching around underneath this book that he was holding in my lap, and he was molesting me. So I came into this awareness that, oh, wow, okay, I knew that this ran in my family, but I was in denial that anything had actually ever happened to me. And so that really helped this thing sort of click into place, which is like, okay, wow, these medicine journeys will reveal to you what's actually happened when you're ready. And so even though I'd done so much work around sexuality and worked with hundreds of people around this, there was still something that hadn't fully integrated in my own shadow. And I'm so grateful that it popped in, and I was able to actually move through the anger and the sadness and the grief of it all, but also to realize it didn't start with my step grandfather, that this thing started with whoever abused him and so on and so forth, all the way up the line. And I think that that's an important thing that we, must acknowledge, that it didn't start with the abuser. It started way before that. And when we can step back from that, we can learn to develop some degree of forgiveness, true forgiveness, but also that helps us to not feel like we're the victim of that experience, because it's, this is thousands of years of sexuality being sinful and shameful and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that for the first time. What is it like to share that? Does it feel good? Does it feel like nerve-wracking? Does it feel empowering?
It feels fucking awesome. I mean, the experience itself was wild because I got up, I went into the middle of the circle, and I don't know whether this is real or imaginal, but in this experience, I was literally like pulling his, soul from in between lives down into the actual circle. And I ended up rocking him as a little child in my own arms. And it was a very unique and weird experience, but it was also this sort of acknowledgement, like, yeah, you too. And therefore, this is where the lineage and the line breaks. And in a lot of ways, I'm very grateful that that all happened, because now I have super deep empathy and compassion for those that I work with who have similar backgrounds.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And you're talking about the ayahuasca ceremony, just for clarity.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's real. I think you mentioned before we hit record that possibly that experience helped you, or not helped, but guided you or pushed you towards the addictive patterns that you started developing with porn. Is that accurate?
It is. But I was also in a weird situation, which is that I lived in Ephrata, Washington, in Washington State. And my hometown was the first town in all of America that got fiber wire put in underground. So I went from no internet to high-speed internet. And so there was a program back then called Kaza, I can't remember what it was called. It was like Napster with video. And back then there were no thumbnails. You would just see the title of the video and you would download it and then you would watch it. And I would just sit there, this is all when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, watching these porn videos from start to finish in this sort of frozen state, eroticizing things that were, totally violent, totally not appropriate, animal porn, all kinds of things, where my nervous system was taking on all that energy. And when I went through my trauma training, I realized that trauma is not in the event, but it's that energy stored in my system when something happens too much, too fast, too soon. And all of that was too much, too fast, too soon for where I was developmentally. And so all of that yuck and that eroticized wounding was in my system, which then informed the expectations that I placed on all of my partners thereafter. And that really was what set me up for a lot of relational pain and a lot of trauma bonding, a tremendous amount. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So again, before we hit record here, we exchanged some voice messages back and forth on Messenger too. And one of the directions I'd love to go in is exploring porn more deeply, and start by possibly talking about, like, what is the reality of the porn industry? Like, what do the porn companies want? Like, how do you see them? You said some things like they see us as numbers, as IP addresses, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, what are we dealing with here?
So I think where this begins is, when I went off to college at the University of Washington, I joined a fraternity, and I walked into a situation where the people that were, the men that were there before me had indexed over thousands of porn videos, whether it was by porn star or genre. And so the server would basically bog down every time we got, to the end of the evening. And there was always these running jokes like, hey, guys, get off the fucking internet because we can't do our homework. And there were, 15 fraternities on campus, all with their own porn libraries. So I grew up in the time when that misogynistic way of being was extremely normalized, in a way where it was actually, you were basically bullied and or shamed if you didn't consume pornography. It was almost like an expectation that this is just the way that it is. But getting back to your point around, like, what are these actual, these Pornhub, what are these actual porn companies doing and how do they see us? Well, that really has opened up a lot. Like my eyes have opened up a lot just by doing psychedelics and watching pornography, taking mushrooms, taking DMT, taking LSD, and sitting more as a researcher, not to arouse myself, but just clicking around and watching what's really happening. What are the ways in which they understand our actual eroticized wounding and therefore the nature of the sexual keywords that they're actually, creating pornography for? Because obviously this is all technology, and just like any SEO, they're watching what we're searching for, but then they're looking at, well, when does this individual sign off on, meaning the ejaculation is complete? What was the thing that got them? And being able to look at that IP address and to be able to look at those search terms and be able to put more of that type of pornography in that person's feed over time. And so the way I look at this is that the porn industry is just using us as a means to an end. They've commercialized our life force, and they've gotten us addicted to these dopamine hits, which allows for them to sell us anything else that they want to sell us. Because a lot of these, even like Chase Bank and these large companies, often have ties into the porn industry. And so when you look at it on a macro scale, it's not just the porn industry. It's if they can get us to sexualize and objectify ourselves, they can sell us t-shirts and cars and fucking supplements and anything that we need because our dick doesn't work or what have you. Right. So, so that's what I see. And it's pretty gnarly. The other thing that I've noticed is that when I'm watching pornography, when you're in a DMT space, the energy is fractaled. Like when you look out at things, you can see the fractaled energy. And my sort of experience is that we all have a field that kind of operates and lives around us. But when you're watching pornography inside of your own field, not only are you taking it into your own consciousness, which is impacting the way in which your brain functions and the programming of your psychological state, but it also, in my observation, it actually impacts your field, meaning that pornographic material comes into the space between where your physical body ends and where your field ends. And so what I'm noticing is that if we're watching a lot of pornography and then we go out into the world, we don't actually realize this, but people can actually feel it. It's an energetic vibrational frequency that especially women can pick up on. And the deeper I went into outgrowing pornography, the safer I felt in my own system. And I noticed the safer women of all ages, from the littlest girls to the grandmothers, even to the animals, also felt safer in my presence because I wasn't carrying that objectification, pornographic mindset lens as I was going out and traversing into the world.
Yeah. Man, that's fascinating. Two things. Number one, I just want to say, holy shit, I can't imagine watching porn on psychedelics, even though I understand you're doing that for research purposes. At least when I think about myself and my experience with psychedelics, that would just be fucking wild. So kudos for you for doing that research. And I'm glad you're able to do that in a way that works for you. When I partake in psychedelics, I can't even operate my phone. It's just, I'm sure maybe I could with practice, but just want to acknowledge that and say, wow, that's a lot. And number two, that field piece it's interesting to hear you say that. And I'm thinking of all the different ways we interact with people, energetic, nonverbal, body language, et cetera. And when I think back to times when I've watched a lot of porn, and I'll even do experiments these days just to check and see, have I done enough work to make that not impact me in the same way? But if I watch porn, even for a little bit, for the next day or two, I'll almost see these ghost images of the porn itself. I'm not actually hallucinating, but there's this weird sort of almost visual, right on the edge of visual imprint that it leaves in my system. And I can just see that overlaid to other stuff. To clarify, I'm not actually seeing these things, but somehow the imagery is there. And I can tell that it's impacting how I'm interacting with people and even just being in space, so just that's been a really interesting thing to observe.
Yeah. Like tracers almost.
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
But of really intense shit that's and when I say intense, just camera angles of things you would never see in real life, that's designed to be as stimulating as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the porn industry, you're chasing the dopamine hit. Once you've ejaculated, you fall below baseline. You now need a little bit more novel porn to get you to that same level. And so even if you start with pornography that is relatively, just let's just say it's consensual and it's loving, often you're going to find yourself in the weirdest places in the internet where things are really dark, because your brain is an operating novel seeking machine, and it's going to go into deeper and darker places. And the industries are going to obviously use you as a means to an end to get you there, because they're going to profit off of that.
Totally. So are you saying that if you watch a bunch of porn and you just don't ejaculate, you'll be fine?
No, I mean, it impacts me too. It doesn't stay as long in my system. And I also don't have that yuck feel when I'm done, or that empty feeling where I feel hollow after I've ejaculated to it. Yeah.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Different, but still impactful.
Yep.
So have you taken psychedelics and gone into the realm of virtual reality porn, or have you gone into the realm of virtual reality without psychedelics, or what have you explored there?
Without. Yeah, that would be a little too much. In fact, the virtual reality porn experience for me was by far the hardest thing to shake out of my nervous system of anything that I've ever done, even more than psychedelic porn. My men's group, we were just together. We were out in Julian. I live here in San Diego, and we just went out, and one of them brought a headset, and I was sober, and I was like, hey, I want to see what this is all about. Will you guys support me to watch this? And so they all just kind of sat around me as I put it on. And here's what I see and what I feel is so incredibly scary. So the way that the porn shot is from a point of view perspective. So as you look down, you're looking down at some other guy's dick. As you look up, you can see the sky. As you look forward, it feels like a real person in front of you. And in most cases with porn, with virtual reality porn, it's not just you and another person. It's you and multiple women. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's so many of them. So that's concerning for 2 reasons. The first reason is because there's a lot of men that come to me with penile dysmorphia, where they think that they have a small penis. And when I do parts work with them, I trace it back to the fact that, well, when you first started watching porn, when you're 10, 11, 12 years old, your penis isn't even fully matured. You might not even have pubic hair. You're looking at guys with, porn stars with monster cocks, 7, 8 inches, 9 inches long. And so you're still relating to yourself back then. And this, especially with point of view porn, is going to be problematic, because here we have 9, 10, 11-year-old kids who, are going to be getting the Oculus Rifts and all these different things because they want to be cool and be a part of the Facebook world and Meta and all that. And this stuff's for free online right now today. And they're looking down and they're seeing this huge dick, and there's these 3 or 4 or 5 women coming and worshiping their cock, which I don't know about you, but like, having been a sexually active guy and had lots of sexual partners, I've never remotely had any of these types of experiences. Never fucking happened to me. The chances of this happening with 3 incredibly beautiful, gorgeous women like worshiping you is so incredibly unrealistic. And yet when you're looking into their eyes, it's almost as if you're looking directly into their soul, as if they're right there with you. So you're absorbing the energies and even the traumas of that entire industry so much more deeply than anything that I've ever seen. And it breeds sort of this grandiosity and narcissism, which is you don't have to do much at all. And these women are just going to come and they're going to, just worship you, which is just so not realistic. So I'm scared.
Totally. So
I'm scared. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you go to have sex with an actual person and they don't just completely worship you and bring 3 of their friends, there might be some disappointment.
Yeah. You're not aroused. You can't even get it up. There's a degree where you're not even, or it's so not stimulating enough, because you see this in Reddit forums, you go into NoFap, where teenage boys are fearful that because they've gone so deep into their porn addiction that they can't even get aroused with a real human being, because they've wired their brain so much to this digital prefrontal cortex, think my way to orgasm instead of feel my way to orgasm.
Totally. Oh, I mean, and this is real and this is happening. And like there's a huge amount of erectile dysfunction in people in their 20s, guys in their 20s and 30s. And that's almost certainly porn and porn-like material from the internet, And I was thinking when you talked about how in the VR porn landscape, you're looking right there into their eyes, and those actresses, like they're acting, right? And they're trying to make it feel like they're looking into the camera, trying to make it feel like you can have the most intimate connection with them. And they're not actually I guess I can't really speak for them, but come on, like they're not actually really feeling that deep intimacy with you, obviously, because there's a camera right there, you know? And I remember I was watching this AI presentation earlier this year from some of the most preeminent AI researchers out there, and they were talking about how at the previous rise of social media, the commodity for sale was time, right? Gets you on the app as long as possible. But now the next commodity is intimacy. And so all these companies are trying to figure out how to create like a deeper intimacy with people, because that will help them sell more than this time thing. So VR porn seems like it's a scary step in that direction. You know?
Yeah. And then AI porn, which is ultimately a computer generated pornography where you're typing to a computer and it knows how to bond with you better than another person. And so you're literally chatting with this thing and or talking to this thing that's not even fucking real. I mean, that to me is, whoa, scary, like Twilight Zone kind of shit. So just want to name that.
Yeah, and we're not really probably far off from a 3D avatar human that you can have virtual sex with that's AI, you know, that will know how to respond to you and read your body language, and probably eventually hook your penis up to some machine that'll respond to their hand or mouth or whatever. And then like, God, maybe AI sex robots. There's movies about this. I know this is all hypothetical, but I think this is actually stuff that we're probably going to see in our lifetime.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yep. It's happening for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is not quite here yet though. So I'd like to come back to like the grounded, like what's happening now in men's bodies when they watch porn. How do they deal with it? Are there some alternatives? And would you say you're anti-porn?
No, I'm not anti-porn. In fact, if you like porn, roll your own, meaning roll it between you and your partner, and then go ahead and watch it back and learn how to become a better lover. My whole thing is it's about the consumptive nature of it. You're going to go do that, and then you're going to go put that and exploit that on the internet. This is a sacred thing. Whether you like, it's never about the porn. It's not about the technology. It's about your relationship with it. So if you're using the technology or the porn to create a more mystical, more soulfully connected, more beautiful experience, and you're able to become better lovers, then I'm all for it. But most people are not using pornography and technology for that particular reason. They're using it to feel better instead of to better feel. And so it's just about the way that you use it is really my whole thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of a conversation I had previously on this podcast with a guy named Ram, where we talked about like, oh, if you're going to watch porn, you're basically a voyeur. And then why not just try to ask your friends if you can watch them have sex? At least that way there's some real human connection involved, and you can actually learn from each other and then decompress and maybe have a conversation around how did that go? How did that not go well? You know, and learn from the experience. And I like, you said something really that I think I want to quote you on. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but consume or be consumed, or I don't know, 10 seconds back, it was great. But yeah, I like that perspective. And I like the roll your own idea for sure. That's something I've played with before. And I found it really beautiful and connective to share that experience with my partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, I have never had 3 or 4 or 5 gorgeous women going down on me, worshiping me. I don't think that's something I would be surprised if that happens in my lifetime. It's also not a goal, you know? But I have experienced beautiful threesomes, but they've been quite rare, and they've taken a monumental amount of personal growth work and communication work to actually make them happen and feel good and healthy for everybody involved. So just like adding that tidbit to the puzzle as well.
Yeah. Good addition.
Yeah. So is it possible to masturbate in a healthy way while watching porn?
While watching porn? Well, it kind of depends upon the porn that you're watching. You know, I did a Google search a while back, you know, around consensual porn or ethical porn. And there was a website that had basically indexed the 25 most ethically sourced porn sites. And I pulled them all up as a tab across the top. And I just went from one to the next to try to figure out what was really going on. Is it really ethical? How do I feel with it? And to be honest, there was maybe 1 or 2 sites with several videos that felt really like there was love happening between the individuals. But for the most part, it just felt like pornography. It didn't actually feel anything that was sort of, didn't feel like love between it. It was just still performative. So I think it's about that. I was listening to your podcast with, what was his name? Sutton? What's Simon? Yeah. And he was talking about that, can we watch porn and then can we turn it off? And then can we be with the actual physical sensations and so on and so forth? But what I would say, like when I help men kind of move out of the pornographic mindset and moving out of porn, I'll have them start with audio style porn. So they're listening to it instead of they're watching it. So I like that as a transition. But I think ultimately, I don't necessarily know if it can be that mindful if you're so visually stimulated. It's not, You're not really in the physical form where you're touching your whole body and using it as an erotic zone. You're so focused on hand to cock or eye to cock sort of relationship, and you're not really getting into the fullness of it all is kind of what I've experienced.
Yeah. That resonates with my own personal experience too. And I'll also add, I've tried watching some sort of ethical porn to see what it's like. And it still, for me, impacts me in a similar way because I'm still looking at it with this sort of like consumption style mentality. The outlier to that is I've watched a couple Erica Lust films with some friends that have been filmed almost in like the Planet Earth style of sex, to where it's not, you would be hard pressed to even call it porn, but it's like sexual parts moving and growing together in these really beautifully artfully shot ways that are not built to add, that sort of arousal, out of control, ramping up type thing. But then to me, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, that's not even really actually porn, those specific styles of videos. It's just like beautiful art video that's nude and involves sexuality. I guess I would put that in a different category. Thanks for letting me think that out loud.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you have talked about, not here yet on this podcast, but I know you've come up with some porn archetypes. I don't know if does that feel inspiring to share?
Sure. Yeah. This is the first time I've actually talked about this on any podcast. So I'm jazzed to do it with you.
Awesome.
So there was a woman who contacted me through Instagram, living in the UK. She's now a certified sexologist, but before she got into being a sexologist, she worked as a stripper. She worked kind of in the sex worker industry. And then when COVID hit, she became a cammer because that was the only alternative to be able to make money. And so she's seen thousands, well, in her words, thousands of men over those several years. And when we started chatting, my first question was, can we make this into archetypes? And as soon as I said that to her, she's like, oh my God, yes. And I would love to do that. And I was like, okay, so let's do this. So over the 3 months, we basically met regularly and we started to develop what I'm calling the 11 porn archetypes, which is ultimately, who are these men? What are they requesting? How old are they? What is their socioeconomic background? What is their addictions? Why are they using porn? What is it about? And the reason why I was so curious about building this into archetypes is because not every man is coming to pornography for the same reasons. And therefore, there's no simple solution, which is, hey, this is the map to outgrow porn. It's not. Each man is so unique and so different. And so helping it to be bucketed is helpful. And so would you want to just jam on these and kind of just go through it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it sounds like to me, just to be clear up front, this is not a diagnostic sort of punitive, these are the reasons these are men are bad. It's more like how to help understand yourself so you can better navigate these realms. This is the lens you're coming from.
Yeah. So ideally what I'll do is I'll build this into some sort of a quiz based upon questions that I ask. And then there'll be, whatever your archetype actually is, there'll be recommendations specific to where you're at in your developmental journey on how to address certain things, because it's just going to be different depending upon how old you are and what you're going to porn for.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's hear some of them.
Yeah, so the first one is the hardened old timers. So these are the 40 plus. They're the deepest ingrained. They often come with drugs, alcohol, cocaine addictions. They don't want to talk. The woman is highly objectified and they're seeking hardcore stimulation and often quite numb and lost. So that is the first one that she spoke to. And I was like, okay.
Interesting.
I didn't really go into what are the recommendations for these particular archetypes. So that's not what we're going to chat about today. This is more just kind of touching in on who they are. So
totally. And did you talk about like, how did she come up with that there are probably also other addictions happening? Is she getting into just conversations about life with these guys?
Yeah, she would ask them and talk to them, and sometimes they would confide in her, and so she would kind of know more about them. Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
The second one is the talkers. These are the 40 plus. They're seasoned users. They have often wives and children. Wives aren't into the things that they are. They're very talkative and they enjoy speaking about their hidden life. They're respectful, they're genuine, they're smart and horny. They don't think they could have both or be both, married and hypersexual. And so they're often in sexless marriages, or they married into a sexless marriage knowing that there was some benefit that they wanted, which was the family and or the other family on the other side, but the spark just wasn't there. So
got it. So these are guys that are sort of just compartmentalizing their life. They're like, I want family, but I also need some outlet for my sexual desires. So I'm going to get it here where it's quote unquote safe and not going to impact my family.
Absolutely. Yep.
But does impact somehow, probably.
Yeah. Well, always. Yeah. Yes. If there's a hidden life, for sure. And then number 3 is the smooth operators. These are also 40 plus. They also have wives. They're handsome and rich. They're less respectful. They're often executives or high-level entrepreneurs. They don't let their guard down. They're superficial in their confidence. They cheat prolifically on business trips. They're misogynistic and hypersexual. They're lost and addicted to status, money, career, and success.
Interesting. Got it. So is it mostly 40 plus guys, or is it these were just the first 3?
These are just the first 3. Yep.
Cool. Very interesting. All right.
I know. It's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And then we have number 4 is the submissive kinksters. So these are under 35. They know what they want. They found their niche, whether it's anal or food or pain. They're often queer identified. They're into humiliation, such as small cock or being pathetic. They eroticize their own shame. And they like things like pegging, nipple clamps, and other sort of toys. They're often logging in public, bathroom stalls, cars, things like that. And they're just ready to go. So that's this particular category.
Interesting. So they desire to be degraded. Is that what I'm hearing? Or they want to degrade the woman?
Yep. Degrade. They want to be degraded by the woman often.
Got it.
And they also are... they expose themselves indecently and or they're very risky with what they do and how they choose to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's the first 4. Number 5 is the young explorers. These are under 25. So they don't know what they want. And even though they say, I like everything. And then when they're given options, they're like, oh, actually, no, I don't like everything. So they're just trying to figure out the world. They grew up in it. They've often never had a sexual experience with a real partner. Porn is normal, and they're using it to become confident and or to impress women and to spark their own awareness and knowledge if they were to get into a relationship, which often they aren't. So these are the youngest of the generation. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And there's some statistic, I forget what exactly it is, but I think it's over 50% of people in that age bracket say that their main source of learning about sex is from porn, which is scary.
Very.
And not great. Not great.
Yeah. And on that note, what I say often to men is we must grieve the fact that not only as a nation, but also the world, we're born without elders. There's not elders here that are actually bringing us into these mindful sexual practices, like when you study Taoist lineages and other martial art communities are all around the world. And so I just want to say that there's a grief that is important for us to acknowledge in and around the fact that porn is the way in which we are educated. So
for sure. And I also want to say, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you're in that age bracket or any of these age brackets, like you're not bad, you're not wrong. This is the context that we've grown up in. And yeah, just like Tyson just said, there aren't good examples. Here we are trying to create some illumination around this and talk about it in a healthy way. But by and large, society as a whole is like very fucked up when it comes to this type of stuff. So yeah, thank you for being here and listening to this podcast and working to create a new pattern for yourself and the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault that, you were just handed the magazine or the phone and this is what happened. I mean, here's a great example. I want to just a little divergent thing, Taylor. I was living in Southeast Asia in Laos for 4 years and I had a coffee roaster, a cafe. This is my life before this. We put in water wells, built schools. And so I was doing a lot of, philanthropic work. And these are communities where just one generation ago during the Vietnam War, they had no electricity. And now the kids, they're down there with their 3G phones and they're stealing my Wi-Fi and I'm watching them watch porn. And so here's a young set of boys. They're like, 12 years old, 13 years old, and they don't even speak English. And the very first thing that they go on is pornography. And I go, wow, when you look at that extrapolated through the entire world, it's frightening. It's super scary to me what's happening. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's understandable that people would go to that because not only is it sexually arousing, but it stimulates the same areas of the brain as things like cocaine and addictive drugs. And it's like, it's a super stimulus,
Yep.
Crazy. All right.
Cool. Number 6, this one would have been me as far as my archetype. So this is the 25 to 40-year-old range. It's called the hopeless romantics. So they find a woman and they fall in love and they irrationally think of her as the most amazing woman ever. Sometimes these men on the other side would fall in love with this woman who was doing the camming. They are at an age in society where, they're at an age where society says, hey, you should be getting married. This is what you need to do. Do you have a partner yet? They put the pressure on you, right? They want to meet in real life, but often they can't afford it. They're desperate and painfully insecure and anxious often. And they're often attractive men, but they can't see themselves clearly. Maybe they've been broken up with or bullied, or they just don't have a good self-image with how they actually are. So.
Got it. So they're seeking actual intimacy and connection through these experiences.
They are. Yeah. Yeah, they've either been rejected or they've struck out or whatever. And so then they just go, well, I won't be rejected here. The porn will never reject me. The cam girl will never reject me. Therefore, I would rather pay for it and or get it for free as opposed to try again.
And they probably would go towards the categories of porn that are intimacy based. So there's like a whole wave of like jerk off instruction videos, where the woman or whoever is giving instructions to the guy in a seductive way or perhaps a degrading way, but there is this actual like element of built-in connection with the viewer into the experience, like as part of the experience, not just watching people fuck, but like, oh, come to this for intimacy and your sexual arousal. I would guess. Yeah. And like the first person girlfriend date videos too. Yeah. Just thinking out loud here about the archetypes. It's really interesting. I'm fascinated by this. I know. Thanks for sharing.
It's super fascinating because it gives us some sort of understanding of what's really happening out there. Number 7 is the uncomfortables. This is the 30 to 50-year-old range. They say that they don't use these sites much. And so in other words, they're coming on being like, oh, I don't do this often, but they often do. It's an awkward conversation. They don't know how to ask for what they want. They're often intimidated and lack confidence. These are the nice guys, no more Mr. Nice Guy sort of style. They're conformists. They often, she was saying, work relatively retail type jobs and or just similar sort of more employees. They're not necessarily in leadership positions. They're often scared of other men and have no male friendships. They're not in men's groups or men's work. And then she also said that often they have some level of autism. Autism shows up a lot in this particular archetype.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And these days, that it seems like societally there's a much greater understanding of autism than there ever has been in the past, and that there's a huge spectrum. And I've even found out that there are a number of people I know, some people I'm friends with, who I never would have guessed, but they also fall under that spectrum as well. So I wonder, makes me curious.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was recently listening to, who was it? It was a podcast, and they were an expert on autism and addiction, specifically sexual addiction. And they were saying that autistic people often have higher, they have higher addiction issues within sexuality and masturbation.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because I was recently speaking to a woman who's a close friend, and she was talking about that, how there was an autistic Down syndrome boy when she was in high school that there was no filter. And so when all of that energy starts to come online, it was coming at her effectively because they don't have that filter. So it's an interesting, just idea. And I have an autistic cousin, and so I know how that has infiltrated and been a part of his journey. So, these are important things to consider. And if you're out there and you are autistic or you're neurodivergent, or if you've had, some sort of learning disability, just understand that you're possibly at higher risk for these pornography addictions than other men. Yeah. Number 8, this is all ages. It's called the quickies. So it's a monotonous up and down robotic way of being. They call and they come and leave in 5 minutes or less. They have shallow breathing, no noise. And she said often these are the type of men that have 3 to 5 wanks per day. So they're just going for it, obviously running their life force very, very low and just kind of chasing the next high after the next high all day long. So, yeah. And she said that, she tries to get them to slow down, to breathe, to actually be with their experience. And it's very, very difficult for them to take any sort of feedback and or any, it's just so, there's so much shame and so much just guilt or whatever is going on for the man.
Sounds like that's like the most similar to just drug use. Mm-hmm. It's just like the drug use category, porn use, porn drug use.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing in the brain as opiates, so it makes sense, and it's a lot more available. Number 9 is the connoisseur. So these are the 20 to 40-year-old men, and she said that these are the men actually that don't need camming. So these are men that she's met out in the world. They have hundreds of videos on their phone. They have a high sex drive. They use dating apps and or they make their own contacts and hook up, one-on-one sort of one-night stands. And they're just never satisfied or satiated. They're often not married. They're smooth talkers. And so they get women to engage with online by sending them porn. And or they go create their own porn when they're out in these experiences. And so then they would prefer to use that than to pay for it because they are above paying for it because they can get it themselves effectively.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how do they show up in a cam type interaction with this woman if they're not paying for it then?
Well, she was just saying that before she was doing the camming, she would meet a lot of these men in her sex working before the camming began. So even though they're outside of the camming archetype, she wanted to include it because she said it was so prevalent.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally. I know a couple of folks like that, or I have known guys in that phase for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. Number 10 is the invisibles. So this is all ages because you don't really know. These are people who don't use their camera. So they come onto screen, videos off. You just hear them talking, making requests, breathing. And so they're basically unwilling to be seen. So that's, it's hard to know who they are or what they are, but we just call them the invisibles.
Makes sense.
And then this is the last one, which is outside of camming, but this is sort of the one that I put in here, which would be maybe people like you or myself. I don't really know what to call it. This is just kind of the working title right now, but I called it the unfuckable withs, which is basically people that have moved through a pornography addiction. They've come out the other side of it and they've gotten to a place where they're not running that pornographic mindset and that objectification. They're not using sex to feel better, but they understand that sex is to better feel. They're actually often aroused by love and eros itself and not just the act of having sex. They understand that sex is a place that you go inside of yourself, not just this thing that you do. And they can see pornography and or movies where there's pornographic imagery, and it's not going to cause them to go back into some sort of a binge, meaning that they're not in that same addictive quality. It's kind of like an alcoholic that has outgrown alcohol and says, I can never drink again, not even a sip, because if I do, I'll go back to being an alcoholic. I'm not saying that. I'm saying these are men that have come out the other side. There's a healing relationship with it. They can be exposed to pornography, and yet they're not going to fall back into those old ways of being or those traps. So
Yeah.
that's an archetype that I think is important, because it's well, where are we striving for? Like, what is the journey? What is the hero's journey within your relationship to pornography and porn use?
Yeah. Seems like there might almost be a room for an intermediary as well, too, because like, how do you go from any of those other archetypes to the unfuckwithable, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on that too. Like what is the process of going forward?
It's a great point. I will actually add another archetype, because I think you're right. There is definitely an intermediary step. But what I'm hearing in terms of your question here is how do we go from what I call mindless masturbation or mindless ways of relating to sexuality into more mindful ways? So,
and also I'll just add, back when I was in the throes of my porn addiction, like watching multiple times a day, masturbating regularly, ejaculating way too often, there was a point at which I realized, oh wow, this is actually a problem. It's fucking up my life and my romantic relationships. Like, what do? I don't know. And I sort of wavered in that for a while before making progress. And I guess that's what I was kind of talking about the intermediary. There's this sort of realization point of like, oh, there's something wrong here. There's something that's not working so well. I don't know what to do. So maybe I'll just keep doing it, and then there's the point at which I'm like, okay, here are some actual steps I can take. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the steps. Is it just mindful masturbation, and what does that even mean?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important just to first define like what is an addiction. And so I just simplify it and I say it's anything that you can't stop. If you can't stop it, then there's probably something there that needs to be or could be addressed and or looked at. But the way that I kind of describe this, and again, there's no judgment around what people consume, but the way I like to teach it is understanding if Pornhub is the McDonald's drive-through, then the way I describe this is you drive up to the menu and you order your Big Mac with, fries and a shake or whatever, and you get it supersized. That's you going into Pornhub and typing in your search terms. These are the search terms that I want. You order your food, you get into line, and now you're driving up to the front window. And so that's when you're going through the different videos and you're going, okay, which one is it that I actually really like? Okay, here's the one. All right. Now the window opens, they say hello, they get your payment or whatever, and then you smell the food. That's like, okay, I found the fucking video. This is the one that I want, all right? Then they grab the food, they hand it over to you, you grab the food, you set it down, you put the straw in there, you take your sip or whatever. Ooh, got that first hit. Okay, this is the one. You drive away, you just pull over in the parking lot and you grab out that hamburger and you start eating those fries, and you get to the end of that meal and that's where you ejaculate. Now, the reason why I paint that picture is not because there's any judgment on what people eat or don't eat. It's just my way of saying that what we're doing is we're hitting that dopamine high, we're spiking ourselves, and then when we're done, we're like, okay, well, we need to dispose of this. We need to actually get out of our car and go put it in the garbage can, which is no different than, okay, I need to close my phone and I need to go put these tissues in the toilet paper or the tissues in the toilet. And then we're riding that high, that sort of elation for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we start to feel that drop off. And then as that drops off, we get to that place where we realize, oh my gosh, nothing in my life has actually changed. I'm just now low on life force. Whether I ate the McDonald's or whether I just ejaculated mindlessly, nothing in my life has changed for the better, but I just had this little pleasure hit. So when we can kind of understand it that way, then we go, okay, well, then what is mindful look like? And so then I would say, okay, well, what would it look like to go to the store and to get out a recipe and go and buy organic ingredients and come home and make an organic home cooked meal for yourself?
Yeah.
What does that feel like when you do it with intentionality and then you sit down and you actually eat that and you actually do it with intention prayerfully, right? So what I say to men in the way that I help them to kind of move into this direction is I'd say, okay, I call it masturbation as a death practice. And so what I say to men is, if it were the last time that you were going to masturbate and you knew that you were going to die tomorrow and you wanted to do it mindfully, how would you do it differently than the way in which you're currently doing it? And then go sit with that as a question to journal, to meditate on, to talk about, to breathe with. And then from that place, that's what we're transitioning out of. So it's not just, I'm watching porn and now I'm going to do nofap and I'm never going to masturbate again. Because as you know, and I listen on your podcast, that doesn't work because it creates all kinds of other backdraft issues. But how do we go about this mindfully? So first and foremost, okay, well, how often do you want to do it? Is it once a week? Is it once every 2 weeks? Once every 3? Once every 4? Whatever. And then schedule that in your calendar and then make that an appointment to yourself, with yourself, for yourself, to explore moving out of masturbation to feel better into masturbation to better feel. And then what I say is all right, well, what are the ways that you would like to enhance your sexual experience? Music, ambiance, clean room, toys, clothing, mirrors, lube, sensation. What are the things that would be helpful for you to actually feel your way to orgasm instead of think your way through a prefrontal cortex fantasy? And also what I say to men is are you even aware that you can feel your way to orgasm without an image in your mind? And most men don't know that. I didn't know that. And so it's just that awareness of, yeah, you absolutely can. We all are wired to be able to arouse our bodies and bring ourselves into full ecstasy without needing to be thinking about a thing or a past lover or a future lover or a porn or whatever. So that's kind of the journey that I take men on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I would say yes, and to the fantasy visual piece. So for example, when I first did my deep dive of reprogramming myself, no porn, no fantasy, nothing like that, no external stimulation, I actually went through a period of a number of weeks. I think it was about 3 weeks where I couldn't get an erection at all. Mm-hmm. And I thought, holy shit, have I watched so much porn that I've broken my penis or my brain or my sexual response system. I was afraid of that. Luckily, I had the facilitator of that experience said, no, Taylor, you just keep going. Your system needs time to reset and resensitize to what's actually there. But it was unnerving. And I know that this is something a lot of guys will experience if they've watched even any amount of porn or even any amount of fantasy. If they start trying to do this without that, it can feel at best hard to achieve in the beginning, for some people. Sometimes they'll just like totally miss it. And then, I just want to acknowledge that.
I totally feel you. And I would say, yes, the first step after porn would be to use your imagination and to use audio pornography. And then from there, as you step into the next realm, can we begin the process of feeling your way to it, which is to move out? Because when you do actually have an intimate partner in front of you, to be in fantasy is to not be fully present with what is and or the felt sense. So if you desire to have incredible fucking sex where you can make love for hours upon hours and have full ejaculatory choice and control and touch God, being in the mind is where I wouldn't say that it's a requirement, but I would say that it is almost, for me, it has been a requirement. So I can't say for all men that they can't be in that. But for me, in order to actually feel myself, I couldn't be in here. And that was important for men just to be aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and you're not watching this on YouTube, he pointed to his head. It can't be in the head if you want to have those experiences. Got to be present in the body, in the felt sense, not in fantasy, not thinking about somebody playing baseball to try to distract yourself to delay ejaculation either. It's a sensitized body process.
Yeah, absolutely. And learning how to breathe and breath work is a huge one. A lot of men, they come to me for premature ejaculation, and they don't know how to breathe effectively. Like when I'm making love, I'm a fucking lion roaring, in order to move that energy through my system so that it doesn't go out my cock. If you haven't done a lot of breath work and moving energy through the system, it's very difficult in order to, if you're just in secrecy, silence, and shame, and you've masturbated with a death grip on your penis and you're just kind of contracted, and then you go to full stimulation, it's almost impossible not to premature ejaculate. So
totally. Yeah. There's an analogy I like to use for anybody who's ever been surfing. And if you haven't, you can sort of conceptualize it. Like in sex, if you're out there in the ocean on your board and you're just sort of floating around waiting for the next wave to come, and then you see it coming in the distance, eventually before it gets to you, you're going to have to start doing some prep work. And then you're really going to have to go for it and paddle. And that's, for me, is the breath. And that wave is the ejaculation point, in this analogy at least, right? And so if I do enough breath work, AKA paddling, then I can sort of ride that and get in front of the wave. And then I can do all kinds of amazing stuff and explore all kinds of pleasure. But if I miss that, if I don't do enough breath work, then it's just going to push me over the edge and I'm going to ejaculate, or I have to pause and wait for a while and wait for the next wave to come.
I love that. That's a beautiful analogy. And it's so true. It's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and Ocean, there's a lot more beauty and value in you than just whether or not you ejaculate. There's a lot of other kinds of analogies in there, but that one seems to like logically land for some people,
Yeah.
Cool, man. We've had an awesome journey through this conversation. Yeah. I imagine we could talk for a bunch more hours, but I'm wondering, since we're coming to the last little bits of this conversation, are there any pieces that you feel like you would want to include here that you maybe haven't said yet, or anything you want to clarify, any nuggets you want to get in before we finish up?
Yeah. So I teach men a mythopoetic map, and I call it a mythopoetic map because this is not a capital T truth. This is more so my way of helping men to understand what may be going on for them. And the map is that the way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world. And so what I'm getting at there is that if we are objectifying our own bodies, meaning that we're using our penis to feel better whenever we're sad or sick or bored or angry or we can't sleep, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad. It's not sinful. It's not immoral. However, there is an invisible thing that I perceive that happens. And so what I mean by that is, as we objectify ourselves, what we can't see is that we then therefore objectify others, the natural world, and even the ways in which we do business. So objectify the self, therefore I will objectify women and or my partner. Objectify self, therefore I will also treat nature in that same way, meaning I'll take more than I need, or cut down the trees, take more fish out of the sea than is necessary. And so we're overconsumptive of our own life force. We will be overconsumptive out in the way in which we are as a being in the world. And two, the way in which we do business. Objectifying self, therefore I only see Paul to get to Peter. Paul's just a means to an end for me to get to Peter. And when we stop objectifying self and we stop, let's say, watching pornography, what we're really doing is we're not objectifying self, but we're also not allowing external forces to objectify us, because they're ultimately commercializing our life force too. And they've basically commodified our orgasms and our ejaculation, and therefore we're being used as a means to an end. So as we stop using ourselves as a means to an end, we also block others from using us as a means to an end. And therefore we end up freeing up a whole other way of being. So for me, it's not just psychological. This is a whole spiritual process of coming into wholeness as a being on this planet and being in unison and in touch with all the evolutionary process. And then the last piece to this that I'll say is, I know you've spoken about this on different podcasts, but this conversation around circumcision came up. You asked it to one of the men that I was listening to earlier today, the urologist. And you also asked the question to Simon, I think, as well, or maybe it wasn't Simon, it was the other guy. But you were asking, is circumcision, does that leave a lasting impact, or does that leave lasting trauma on the individual? And what I can say is this. Number one, I look at it as a limbic system trauma. I came out at 7:37 out of my mom. At midnight, I was cut. The way I look at this is that was the original mother wound between myself and my mom, which is that even though it wasn't my mom's fault, this is a cultural thing that's happened. It's a religious thing that's happened. It's a medical thing that's happened. Here we are today, and our penis is being chopped, which is that something is being taken away from us without our consent. Our agency has been violated from the moment that we came into this physical plane. This is pre-egoic, pre-verbal. This is when we're just a blub. Our crown chakra and our head, our skull is not even fully formed. So we're just energetically taking everything in. So the reason why I share that is because if you are a man out there who's been circumcised, which America, it's, I believe, around 60%, and the rest of the world can be, some countries even higher than that, then what's important to understand is the way that your penis was treated before you had agency and before you had any sovereignty impacts the way that you treat it today. And the way that you treat your penis today impacts the way that you treat everything and everyone in the world. So it's this awareness that if you were circumcised, it may end up being that there's an unconscious collective issue that's happening underneath the masculine psyche that is causing us to be extractive and or objectifying towards others. And the way that I know all this is doing a 10-gram massive mushroom journey and feeling into the collective transpersonal trauma on the planet of being circumcised. And that was the most hellacious, horrific thing I've ever experienced. But when I came through that portal, that was the message that was basically given, which is the way a man treats his penis is how he treats the world, as a map. And to me, what that really comes down to is if you are out there and you're listening to this and there's some level of awareness around this, there may be some grief still located in your system. And if you feel through that, there may be an opening. And for me, there was. But if you ever watch an actual circumcision online, because I have, my body just moves into full contraction and I just can't even do it. And so to me, I go, okay, there's obviously something here. If trauma is not the event, it's the energy. Is that energy still here causing us to be, masturbating in this particular way? And then does that impact the way that we show up in the world? So I know that was a lot if you're listening, but thank you for, for holding on for that last piece.
Yeah. And just so to clarify, it's not like you're saying if you are circumcised, you're sexually damned forever. No. It sounds like you're just saying there might be an additional layer for you to unveil and look at and work through that you then get to own and create whatever you want to create from that place, but to acknowledge that there was something that happened to you like 99% of the time against your will. Maybe there's the 1% who choose that when they're a teenager or something, but I imagine that percentage is pretty small.
Well, let me speak to that, Taylor. There's 3 men that I've worked with who got circumcised later in life. This was a client who was over in Turkey, and so it was a part of his religious Muslim practice. And then 2 other men where there was issues with their foreskin, and so they were like in the 10 to 12-year-old range. Those 3 men have the most intense pornography addictions of any of the men that I've worked with. They've had the most trauma around the ways in which they've related to sexuality. So what I would say is that has not necessarily, that's not causation, but there's correlation there for me, which is this sort of awareness that when something happens, there's an impact there, and then we're going there to try to fix it or figure it out. So,
yeah. It's definitely an interesting and bigger conversation that we could spend hours going into. And like one of the things I would like to see is a broad statistical analysis of rates of circumcision and levels of violence, because I've done a little bit of research on that, not a ton, but enough to see that there are different. I haven't seen a clear correlation anywhere. I've seen countries that have less circumcision that have greater sexual violence and vice versa. But I'm generally curious about that. I do believe that it leaves a lasting impact. Like I've had a friend who's a therapist ask me about his client who says he's reliving circumcision trauma. He can feel it in his body. And that's like, that's fascinating. Yep. So I believe that it shows up. And
I'll send you an article. I have one article that has some data showing that the most circumcised countries in the world have more of the rape and the sexual violence. But again, it's correlation, not causation. And it's very difficult to do this at scale. But I think it is an important conversation to be having. So,
yeah. Well, Tyson, thank you so much for this really interesting conversation. And thank you, listener or person watching on YouTube, for being here with us. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about all this and improve your sex life and your relationship life, because this will have a ripple effect out throughout the rest of the world. And it's super, super important for us to get together and talk about this stuff because the world needs it. So thank you. Yeah. If you want to work with Tyson, I'll put all his links in the show notes in the video description on YouTube. Definitely check those out. And thank you again so much for being here. I'll see you next time.